So thank you everyone for coming along today. It's the Melbourne Business School's fantastic pleasure to start our new Asia Pacific Social Impact Leadership Dialogue series with wise practices in indigenous leadership. I'd like to open today's proceedings by asking Elder Tom Cranebear to offer a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In my country, we always say the opening prayer before anything begins. And today I'm going to sing a song of journey. All of us are on journey today. So we are striving for the horizon and what lies beyond that. So I have to recite my prayers in my own language before I sing the song. This prayer is for all of you and all of us that came across to visit you wonderful people. Ay o sabatapi, ay o kimmokit, spommokida kenesitaboa akakpin. Kukkinana nikmani ikhsistikuik. Hanika kitsenno matskto bisnok sessenaukin. Naksugida paspina no ksakoi. Kitsebu to matapiksen. O gnaksi naksukakka mannani. Anne gamska kitseikaman stestibatapi. O gnoktaksen iksibno oktooktohpin. Stibatapi. Hanigaki moxugui gisto kipinani. Hogna sabo kapina sugabi baitapis. Nakoto matanano tapis. As pomogit stibatapi. And Hano Zito Tohpina Xakui. Igato api. Hogna kochim skakidan. Zen ikat. Hannegaan is toekomst bij het. Hey.
Notchkin lyric. That means in our language, thank you, Elder, Tom Bear Crane, and Banganu for brothers, for Brian and Don, for coming here to my father's traditional land on Wurundjeri country. I am very honoured to be with you again, and very, very happy that you've travelled here to this land. And again, a very huge and warm thank you to the three of you, but also for your prayer, because it's something that I'm aware of, you know, as one of your customs, or the custom, but also for us in Aboriginal community, it takes us on a journey of spiritual healing. And I really felt that warmth. And I know brothers and sisters that are around here with us today, each from their own journey, each from their own walk of life, would have felt that as deeply as I did. Perhaps more so for me, for the ancestors of my land, and my family. And each of us know how family is so precious to us. And I just want to truly say, Notchkin, thank you. On Wurundjeri country, we have our own way of welcoming people to country. And before I do that, I'd really like to acknowledge the school of, I've forgotten what you're called now, I've gone all into my zone, Melbourne Business School. And but to thank you for your generosity of hosting today, because it is an important time. And I just would like to take just a few minutes to just talk about my feelings, I guess, because of the nature of the business of where I've been today, particularly, of which I've had some discussion with Elder Tom. I've just come this morning from the Department of Justice Community Partnerships Awards, and that's about working with elders, with offenders, with elders and community to reintegrate them back into society. And Elder Tom and I have that affiliation. And I guess when I reflect on that a lot of our Indigenous elders across the world would work in the area of justice. It seems to me that so many hearts are crying, so many hearts are bleeding. There's so much sadness and there's so much sorrow that we have a lot of healing to do. And we may not do it in our time, but we do what we can do. But I think the leadership that comes from not only your people, but from the nations of your people, is a must to what we should have here on this country, given the dislocation of the First Peoples of this land, given the treatment, and I think given the policies that have been implemented, and very sadly in not a healing way, that if we were to take serious lessons, and I know I'm not the only one, not the only elder who would say about these issues, and it has been said for many, many years, if only we could take that proper leaf from nations of yours, Elder Tom. I do hope that these words reach those people who may not have or think that they have an understanding of the First Peoples culture of this land. As in my heart, I believe that they don't truly still today. This is my father's country, and my father would be very proud of me today, as he is always and as he was when I was a little girl. But I think to the heart of bringing people together, and again, I want to very much thank you all for being a part of today. But giving this opportunity to me is yet another way in which I can express the gratitude from not only my father but my ancestors. And I just have to say that my dad was not a tall man, but very tall in stature, and serving for his country in World War I, and returning for the third time to have his land yet again taken from him, decided that his own family would never have to be told where to go, and that they would always have a permanent home. So he bought a house for £2.06, and very pleased to say my younger brother still lives in that house today. And this is the legacy that I give to myself, to my children, my grandchildren and my two beautiful great-grandchildren. But I also extend that to you in the form of the protocol of welcome to country. We, the Wurundjeri people, are known as the Managum people. And the way in which we offer welcome to country today via the traditional custom of the use of all the eucalypt in the bush is a sharing of these branches. So I offer you, Elder Tom, to take a leaf. It seems to me that that's the most appropriate, seems to be the biggest, I think, on the branch doesn't want to leave me. And if I may, excuse me, extend that offer to each and every one of you. Accepting this leaf means that you are welcome to everything from the tops of the trees to the roots of the earth. And I personally would like to say Notchkin, because it means you join with me to pay your respects to the spirits of my ancestors on this great land. Again, I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm so proud that I have this moment in my life as the senior elder of the Wurundjeri people, and I'll certainly be following the footsteps of yours as well that have been placed so purely on Wurundjeri country. And I hope that you can make a return visit yet another time to each of you. My language is the Woi Wurrung, Wominjaka, Wurundjeri Balak, Yemen, Kundibik, and you are most welcome to the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie Joy. And it's always a wonderful thing to experience a welcome to country from Auntie Joy. And one of the things I most love about working with Auntie Joy is one of my very good friends, but is her leadership that she shows and has taught me a lot about cultural leadership. And it's leadership in her family that she's always lived and will continue to live in Healesville, her traditional land, and that's very important. I'm really excited that we can all be here today, and just a little brief about that. Way back in 2003, I got very excited about the work of the BAMS's Aboriginal Leadership Program, and I have been in contact with Brian Callaghan of the program since that time, and we've been talking about our mutual interest in providing leadership development. And I've now developed such a great relationship with the centre, and it's wonderful that they are here for the Shearwater Festival with Laura Brealey to come today. So I'd like to ask Brian to open up today with a little talk about where he sees wise practices. Where does this idea come from, and can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Sure thing. Thank you, and thank you for the welcome to Territory. As Indigenous people, we always do acknowledge the traditional territories that we're on. In Canada, I'm from Sucker Creek First Nation in northern Alberta, which is the western part of our country. If you've heard of the oil sands development that's happening in that region, it's pretty huge news as far as energy development goes. That's the province that I'm from, as well as Elder Tom. I'm from the northern part of the province, and Elder Tom's from the southern part. I actually work in his territory now, traditional lands in southern Alberta. I am a husband and a father, and now a grandfather of 3 beautiful grandchildren. I did want to, tying to the idea of respect for traditional landowners, in Canada, at least since Canada became a dominion, they had done it before, at least the colonial government had entered treaty relationships and with the Indigenous communities to open up the lands for settlement and exploitation. And that happened in Western Canada as well. Elder Tom's community the treaty was settled with their community in 1877, and 22 years later in Northern Alberta they were settled with my community or the Cree of the North, Cree and Dene of the North, on the corner of our reserve in 1899. For a period of time, the reason it was a 22-year lag was it was really far north, and they hadn't discovered a whole lot of resources there yet. But of course they were finding that there was this oil in the river, seeping out of the sands. There was huge forests and even some farming country that far north, Peace River country. Anyway, so all of that to say is Canada has taken a lot of steps, and if you study Indigenous rights, Native studies, Indigenous studies kind of work, a lot of people will turn to Canada and say, well, look what's happened there. They've got Aboriginal and treaty rights entrenched in the Constitution, which is huge, it really is. It's caused governments and companies and so on to really respect traditional lands when they're going to go develop on there. So a lot of changes happen. However, it's still a big struggle. But I did want to say that things have really, really changed in respect to governments legislating over lands, permitting exploitation and resource development on that, and companies now entering benefit agreements in very many forms, including the opportunity for our communities to develop companies who do work for the larger companies in the oil industry, pipeline development, and all kinds of things. That, if you ask me, is a far better model than what our situation used to be and still hasn't completely got out of. And I would argue, as far as I know, Australian history and contemporary times, that there's a lot of movement that needs to happen here to move into that direction. But if you ask me, it makes sense. The corporations kind of get it in Canada now. It was legislation, it was court cases that forced them to go to that position. But now they understand that it makes better business sense to enter agreements, hire people locally from that region. Why build a new town or import people from all over? You know, it doesn't even make business sense to do those steps. So things have changed a lot. And in our court cases, and we had a Royal Commission in the mid-1990s called the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Great database of some very great work done on the relationship between Canada and its Indigenous peoples. And they use the term the new relationship. And the Supreme Court cases, when it talks about first British and then Canadian sovereignty being asserted over our lands, and these existing sovereignties, our courts actually use those terms, our existing sovereignties, these First Nations and other Indigenous people sovereignties have to be reconciled. And they use this idea of new relationship and partnership approach. I don't know why I started here. Maybe it's because it's a business school. Maybe it's because I'm talking about traditional lands. But I think that's a really important message that needs to be understood, and I would argue practiced by state governments when they're dealing with their Indigenous peoples. Certainly the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People talk about full informed consent before you negatively impact their lands or resources or culture, is a far better model than what has happened in the past. So I'll kick off from that, and I hope I don't sound like I'm scolding, or I hope I don't sound like I'm being negative, because I don't intend to be. I just think that that's a far better model of being good people in a world. And the teachings we get from our elders in our programs, in our culture, Don's very culturally attuned in the way he approaches teaching and so on. I'm sure, and I would know that elders in this lands would be the same, and that is that a whole lot of the traditional teachings are about how to be good human beings in your community and relating to other nations and other peoples. And part of what I've just laid out, I think, is a better form of getting along in the world, everyone benefiting from the resources, is a far better model than I'm going to assert my strength and you're going to get out of my way and you're not going to receive any benefits from it, is a terrible model. And the other piece of that, since we're here for the Shearwater Festival, is just the environmental ethic that Indigenous communities often have. When you have an ethic of giving thanks for, you may have done this, but certainly we would do this in our communities. If we went and picked berries or medicines or anything from the environment, we leave some tobacco, we do a prayer, we give thanks, because we're respecting the spirit of that resource, which has spirit. We believe it has spirit. And it will provide for us if we respect it and we take what we need and we always take care of it. I think that ethic in the world can go a long way. And I think business schools, governments, hopefully the market economy could really learn from other ethics and ways of doing and being to actually say, we can't continue to to just consume and not have some respect for that kind of impact. Again, I feel like I'm like I'm preaching, and I'm sorry about that.
I think it's very positive, if I might say so.
Well, thank you. In our programs, Indigenous Leadership and Management programs at the Banff Centre in Alberta, Canada, we have programs that are 1 week intensive programs. So we're a post-secondary institution, but we're non-credited as well. So we give a certificate in our program, but they're 1 week intensives. It's very similar to what an executive MBA might be like. If you took 6 1-week modules over a period of a couple of years and worked on a project, you get your executive MBA. It's got maybe some similarities to that kind of model. One of our faculty there, Leroy Littlebear, a Blackfoot gentleman as well. Tom's community is near Calgary, one of our cities, and Leroy's community is the Blood Reserve, the Kainai. They're also Blackfoot people. When he's talking about the changes that need to happen in our communities to think big again, to dream big, to think like a nation and not think like a colonial mindset, like I can't do it unless I ask Indian Affairs, or we can't dream that big. He's really telling us to change the conversation. And that's what we're telling our community leaders, and I would like to share and offer to the world that maybe we should change our conversation as well. Now, wise practices, now I'm finally there. We came up with this term partly in a response to the term best practices. Best practices tends to be a corporate model, certainly a Western model, but a kind of a corporate model that generalizes to a large extent and is to a great extent doesn't really allow for Indigenous voice or context to be part of that conversation. So we approached it partly like that, and there's been some new critical comments by all kinds of leader and manager scholars of the term best practices. And there's a lot of new terms out there. There's promising practice and so on. There's actually a woman from University of Victoria in Canada, in the British Columbia, who is looking at something like 4 terms at least. And anyway, so you keep your eye out for that article in the near future. But anyway, so we critiqued this term best practices and came up with wise practices. It's not our own term. We found it in some literature and other conversations. The World Bank, some scholars in some of their scholarship has used that word. So we really like that idea, that term, that concept, because we believe that as we start to document these case study stories that we're doing, we're telling the other side of the story. Some of your comments are absolutely true, and they're absolutely true in our communities where there's still some strong social problems, there's unemployment, there's low education, there's poverty, and then that violence that happens and many of our people going to prison and so on, that certainly is happening. And social sciences have documented that. I remember my wife, she's a sociologist, doing this search in her in her master's on wellness, Indigenous, like Aboriginal and wellness, those 2 terms or something. There were like 6 hits came back. But when she put in something like Aboriginal and social problems or dysfunction, there were tens of thousands of hits. We want to tell the other side of the story, the other side of the ledger. There are a lot of good practices happening in communities, wise practices that we can learn from that wisdom and share it with our leaders to inspire them, and they can actually read that case study, go meet that community, meet with them, learn how they struggled and got over those, put the resources together to make this venture happen and become a success. That's what we're documenting. And so there's wisdom from the stories being told to the learner, these leaders who will study this. But also the other side of that is we want those leaders to see the glass half full. We want them to understand they have a lot of wisdom, assets, strengths, and gifts in their own community that they can build from. So not to have a victim mentality, to say, I can't do it because I have no funding. You know what? If you are inspired by other stories and you believe you can do things and you have a vision and start to plan and do those, more technical side of things, anything is possible. So in a bit of a nutshell, I guess that's where our WISE practices is going. It's exciting at my institution, the BAM Center. We got a brand new, he's a very young man, way younger than me, tall, way taller than me too. Jeff Mellinson is an amazing, he's from an arts background, but he also has an MBA. He's inspired our institution because he wants, my programs are Indigenous Leadership and Management, are part of a small, I'm a small office, part of a big office called Leadership Development, which at one time was called Center for Management, is now called Leadership Development. Jeff sees leadership development as a way for, there'll still be programs that inspire leaders from corporations, from institutions and other fields, nonprofits, to be efficient and be effective in their role, but to also do good in the world. And I like what this Asia Pacific Social Impact Leadership Center is about. It's about you can do well, but also do good in the world. And Jeff has inspired leadership development to start thinking about social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, and you can still do good, but do good in the world. And I think our programs have been doing that for a microcosm of that, and that is Indigenous communities. So I know that Jeff really respects our programs and what we've been able to accomplish, and actually wants leadership development, this bigger office, to start to think and understand ways to actually inspire rural communities that are losing populations and all kinds of things, to do good in the world as well. So I'll just leave it there for now. I know there'll be a lot of conversation. I'm going to turn it over back to you first.
No.
And then I think Dawn can add on to that as well.
Thank you, Brian. And can I just make a small note that Brian kind of started out his life as a lawyer and brings that legal kind of real look at the way that First Nations country and land is managed, and looking at it from a leadership and management perspective gives it something different. And now to have someone like Jeff Mellinson who brings arts and an MBA together, it's all these different world views, and that's one of the things that I absolutely love about Don McIntyre. I was really fortunate to sit in on a program that Don co-taught, leadership development program. And Don is an artist, a lawyer, an academic. Am I leaving anything else out? An amazing person, a singer, a father. And last time I saw you, the time before, you had hurt your thumb from doing a major carving.
I crushed all of my fingers under a totem pole.
That's right.
But they're all back. I can type again. So.
Would you like to make a contribution at this point?
Miigwech, is it okay if I stand? Traditionally, out of respect, in my neck of the woods, we stand out of respect for you and out of respect for the words that I'm going to give because they've been given from my ancestors. The way we're taught about vision is that the ancestors point you in a direction, and then you move forward that way, and we do it over 7 generations. And for 3 generations behind me, my ancestors pointed away. And I stand here today, and 3 generations into the future, they'll be based on where I've pointed today. So it becomes a weight and a duty. And so we're taught to stand for you and for me and my ancestors. I would like to start by saying, to acknowledge that we are on Wurundjeri territories. And I would like to also pay my respects to the elders in the room, both are the elders past and present. Those in the room, Elder Joy and Elder Tom. And looking around the room, I think that's it. Though I would never have assumed you as an elder, looking around the room. Elder Joy talked about the fact that really this is about a spiritual journey. And a lot of times what happens in my work, so I am just finishing up a PhD in law. So I was a lawyer, I've done a master's in law, I've got a PhD now. And so I've spent a number of years teaching Western ideas of law at the law school and teaching trust law and contract law. And a lot of times what happens is I bring into my work, when I'm teaching Western ideas of law, I teach about spiritual journeys. And at first my class, the kids in my class will sort of bulk, because I'm assuming very much like at the Melbourne Business School, the idea of talking about a spiritual journey is somewhat foreign, and they don't feel comfortable with it at first, because that's not how we've been taught to talk about these ideas. And I want to sort of bring that idea in. I want to bring the idea of the restorative justice that you were talking about, because we seem to be comfortable now in the West saying that, and I'll go back and forth saying we, because I walk both worlds. I'm in the West, I'm in my indigenous path. So I say we, and you guys can figure out which is which. But we seem to be very comfortable now talking about restorative justice models, transformative justice models, where we're willing to embrace that indigenous idea of law in that way. We're not quite as comfortable doing it in a business model. We feel very uncomfortable when we start talking about, well, let's talk about how we can do a restorative model of business. And really what wise practice is about in that context, I think, is about just that, a restorative model of business. Brian talked about the ledger book, and there's the ledger books for indigenous people in our territories have a very specific meaning, because the young boys, when they were sent to the residential schools, were taught to keep account in the ledger books and to tell the story and the history. And from the company's perspective, from Hudson Bay and the Western trading company's perspective, what that meant was how many pelts came in, how many guns, how many knives, what payment went out, what seed went out. Balance it that way. With the young boys, when they were told that they were supposed to keep an account and balance, they saw this as the most incredible gift, because in their tradition, they had power bundles or medicine bundles. And medicine bundles were pieces of pelt that you would roll out, and inside would be an incredible story. And sometimes in those, there would be the leaf from the journey, and that would become part of it. And then I would put marks to designate what that meant to me. And I would tell the whole story of this journey inside there. Well, what the ledger books did was suddenly, I'll go back one step, you would then roll it up and unroll it to tell the story. Now, a bundle, they're big. When you roll up hide, it's a big, heavy thing to carry. And if you want to carry more than one story, it becomes even heavier. And if you travel a lot, and you're traveling with just a dog to carry your stuff with you, it's even heavier. So what the ledger books allowed, and the magic of the ledger books for the young boys, was they could write down the story and then turn the page, and there was another place to tell another story, to do the ledgers. Now, for them, the stories that were important, the accounting that were important for them in their world, was they would tell stories of great battles, and they would draw them into the ledger books. And they would tell stories of great meetings between chiefs and treaties that had come, and meetings where relationships were formed. This is what they felt was the accounting. And the great power became, because the ledger book, when you folded it up, and you had all of these great stories, and you folded it up and rolled it, it was still very, very light, and you could carry. So instead of just carrying one ledger or one bundle, what happened is you could carry many, many. And the value was not in the price you could get for the bundle, because the bundles weren't for sale. They were priceless. And one of the interesting things that I've noticed in business is a lot of times we talk about stuff being priceless, and then we'll ask, well, how much? And it's like, oh no, this is a Van Gogh, it's priceless. But for $120 million, you can have a priceless Van Gogh. And what we fail to recognize in business, and I think that needs to be embraced, and this is where I'll go into wise practice. What we fail to realize is that what we're talking about is price full. And we're talking about price full objects in one construction, in one business paradigm. But in indigenous culture, in my culture, we have an understanding that priceless can mean no price. You can't put a price on it. So the headwaters can't have a price if they're going to be destroyed. This all ties in the work that we're doing. So I do much more theoretical work. Brian does the practical work, and Elder Tom keeps us spiritually bound. So we try to cover a lot of bases. But in business, what happens is wise practices is about going to the community, because that's the seed of where everything began. And wise practices is about putting the seeds in the ground to grow something beautiful. So if you take this tells from a scientific perspective, it tells the DNA of everything. It tells the beginnings, and we can break this down and know the absolute essence of the tree that it came from. Tell the location that it came from. And that's great science. But also when I was a young boy and I was being taught how to do hunting, we were also taught that when you open up a fish, you can tell the lake that the fish came from. And I've spoken with elders here, and they say, we had that knowledge too. That knowledge is 10,000 years old. And the reason why our knowledges are 10,000 years old is because that's how long we've been doing it. And 10,000 years ago, we made a whole lot of mistakes and figured out a good way. And so the good way is the way that in country, in territory, is the best way to do it. So that when you look with a good vision, when the community comes together and creates their vision and knows where their ancestors pointed them and where they need to point their children, what a good vision allows you to do is look at business and say, this is not a good place to dig. It's not a good place to dig, despite the fact that a best practice may say, you've got 25 years of minerals right underneath this headwater. Well, that's not the best reason to dig there. Wise practices say, for this community, what's important? The headwaters are important, so we're going to leave those. How can we, as business people, work within that community? Because there's all kinds of reasons to work within the communities. One of them is to say, well, what about e-jobs? What about creating, manufacturing somewhere else? What about ecotourism? Those are all ways of looking and saying, now that's a good way to keep the country the way it's supposed to be, and also to dig. Because I'm not suggesting that there's not times that it's good to dig. I come from a place where we've dug copper forever, because 9,000 years ago we figured there was great things to do with copper, so we began digging copper. It's not that there's an opposition to it, it's a recognition. And Brian talked briefly about the Supreme Court. Within the Supreme Court in our country, amongst Aboriginal people, there's now been respected a duty to consult. Now that duty to consult is actually with the governments. So the federal, provincial, and municipal governments of Canada have a duty to consult with Aboriginal peoples and Aboriginal governments when anything is going to happen. Strangely, very, very little of that duty to consult actually happens between government and the First Nations government. It actually happens with business people. And it's because corporations and businesses, when they come in, they recognize a level of certainty that they've never been able to experience before. And that certainty comes because you're in a relationship. You're in a partnership. You're in a partnership from the very beginning. So for a number of years, I do a lot of work with Harvard Negotiation Project, and they're constantly upgrading and innovating. But only very recently did they put into their structure a relationship at the beginning of a journey that you're going to do as partners. That's a very new for Harvard. Well, if you asked because I've been teaching the Harvard negotiation model and the Harvard business model, and the question I constantly get asked by elders is, well, what about the beginning? Like, there has to be a relationship at the beginning. You have to break bread. You have to know who you are. Why would you start and just be willing to blindly go into business for 25 years and then on the hope that you wanted to continue that relationship so that you would be good throughout those 25 years? Unfortunately, there's a small history of business not actually working that way. And so the elders and the teachings, the wise practice is to say, let's start with the relationship. Let me know who you are. Come and eat with me. And do our prayers. And the way I was taught, my prayer system for the smudge is to say, pure mind to think with, pure eyes to see with, pure ears to hear with, pure mouth to speak with, and pure heart to be with. And I do that before I go into a business meeting, before I do a negotiation. And a number of times I do it in front of the person I'm going to do business with, which seems like a very strange thing, to sort of open yourself up and say, look, we're going to do business together. We're going to negotiate. But I'm telling you I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to be pure, and I'm going to look at the stuff you do with a good eye. It seems like you're giving away the farm, right? You're saying, are you crazy? Don't tell them that before you start. That's a foolish move. But when I come that way, it's very hard for anyone on the other side of the table to come any other way. And very quickly what happens is we're not at any table doing an adversarial thing back and forth across the table. We actually end up talking on one end of the table, moving forward, looking, and that way I can say to them, the wise practice is the one that my ancestors pointed me in. I'll take you along the path, and it will help all of our children. Thank you. Magwet.
Well, thank you, Don. That was quite profound.
Profound too?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That was awesome. It was fabulous. Wonderful way to start. We invite everyone here today to have a dialogue about some of the ideas that you've been bringing up, and we might just kind of introduce people so that you know everyone around the room. I'm not sure if people would like to do their own introduction. Perhaps I could introduce that first. Murali Das is a research fellow at the Asia Pacific Social Impact Leadership Centre, working on social entrepreneurship and leadership. Jennifer Whelan is a social psychologist who works with us at the Asia Pacific Social Impact Leadership Centre, who's working on bias in terms of employment pathways for people with disabilities. Adrian Appo is CEO of Gambina, which works with young Aboriginal people in Shepparton area working with them from quite an early age along high school schooling and into employment and education pathways, and has a 90-95% outcome and excellent, actually the nation's best employment outcomes. For Gambina. And Adrian is one of our Murra Masterclass mob. We've been running an Aboriginal business masterclass series over the last 6 months, and we'll be finishing with the 6th class tomorrow. So wonderful to have Adrian here. Dr. Odette Kaleda is a lecturer in the Australian Indigenous Studies program at the University of Melbourne. Is quite a interested scholar around gender, whiteness and Indigenous studies. It's a fantastic voice. Dr. Laura Brealey is the Artistic Director of the Shearwater Festival and an academic, an artist, a songwriter and a facilitator of wonderful conversations. This is Professor Ian Williamson, who is the Director of the Asia Pacific Social Impact Leadership Centre, also our Associate Dean at the Melbourne Business School in International Relations. And Professor Andrea Hull is Emeritus Professor of the University of Melbourne. Andrea has a lot of non-executive board appointments and was worked previously as a Professor and Director of the Victorian College of the Arts. A wonderful person to have here. So welcome to you all. Maybe I'd like to open it up to see if people had any kind of questions or lines of inquiry that you wanted to go down.
Could I just make a comment? I've been listening very intently, and I think that, you know, from time to time we've heard this before, or we wish this could happen. And so you get that, you know, pessimistic view of things. But I have to tell you that I've come away with 3 kind of statements. And those 3, of course, are about the use of the word model, which we all practice too. But the biggest not wise practice in this country is the lack of recognition of our people in the Constitution. So I've said it's model versus Constitution. Restorative justice is so right in saying that, I believe, Don, because it is easy to kind of pretend that you're going to fix things. And I say this in the context of government. I don't say that in terms of justice, because I think that's working pretty well. But to say that it's a business idea where we might get back our self-determination and our self-management won't happen. They just don't want the minority of this country, who are the First Peoples of this country, to have that monopoly again. And the third thing, which I absolutely love, because I think that's what it's all about, is priceless. For us as Indigenous people, or any person that has a priceless object, knows the value of that, really values it for what it's worth. There's no price tag you can put on that. However, priceful, for me, is certainly, again, that economic avenue that we don't, we're not seen as being people who can run our own businesses, or indeed we can gain from having a business. So just for me, I just want to say that they're the 3 models that I will do some work on and represent to the governments of this country. So I want to thank you very much for giving me new light and an increased passion into what should be for our people of this country. And I just wanted to say to you about giving back. We give back to the land when we take from the land. So yes, that's an honour that we have here as well.
If I could comment on, sure. Sorry, the first, your first point where you said it would never happen from a business perspective, it's actually a very new idea back home too, that this would ever happen. And it's only been probably in the last 20 years that the idea of a business, and really the cards are stacked against the Indigenous people. The fact that reserve lands are out of the fee simple system means that it's impossible to get a mortgage, therefore it's almost impossible to get a loan. So startup funds are almost impossible. All of those things are as true, I think, within both. However, there are a number of examples, not only in Canada, but in North America. I mean, the Mississippi Choctaw is a best practices that, according to the Harvard business
Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development?
That's the one. I'm very bad at these, so I have to write them all down. But they should never have succeeded. They actually, 4 counties around them, almost 90 or 95% of the employment for the 4 counties around the Choctaw all happens on reserve. And it was because of just a very good vision of what their ancestors had happened. There are a couple of other examples in Canada. I mean, 60On was an Aboriginal company that went and got ISO certification. And that was sort of, suddenly the business community could not ignore that. There are nations, Member 2 First Nation did the exact same thing. They got business certification, which allows, so suddenly that designation opened doors that were incredibly hard, impossible. You use the word, it would never happen, and they said it's impossible, it'll never happen. But those sort of things, looking out and saying, what do we want to do, how do we want to do it? Oh, with that certification, we can get these doors open. And so suddenly what happened was Member 2 has ended up with a better credit rating than Canada, which becomes a very interesting thing when you start to look at it and you say, really, it's better to go to this First Nation than to this country or to this province. It changes the way people look at it. Not to suggest that you are wrong in what you said, but I think what happens is part of the teaching on the best practice side says there are certain things you can't do. There are certain things that geographically or socially or economically are impossible. And what wise practice says is, okay, so I may not be doing that. Where's the seed that allows me to be an equal partner?
Can I ask a question around tourism, around sustainable and cultural tourism, particularly in the protected areas? I don't know whether that's the right word to describe reserves, but we've got some protected areas in Australia, like Arnhem Land, for example. And the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land, for example, are very interested in exploring how they can stay in control of tourism, but at the same time open up their homelands to people so that they can share their culture. But there are big issues there, as you can imagine, because there are infrastructure issues, all sorts of things which, on one hand, would invite investment from people that want some kind of ownership, but at the same time, that's not for sale. So I'm just interested to know how Indigenous people in Canada have approached this.
Well, there are a lot of First Nations that are opening up reserve lands. They're still called reserves. To development is in law, in Canadian law, the federal crown owns that reserve land for the benefit of the First Nation. So that's de jure, but de facto, in fact, the First Nation really owns it and lives on it and uses it and so on. So what has to happen is a surrender occurs. So let's say an area of the reserve, the community votes on it and decides, the leadership says this is a good way to go. They zone an area and they're going to build, let's say, an industrial park. They build all the infrastructure, the streets, the water systems and power poles and all that. And then they lease the land out and all these off-reserve investors come and buy some of the stores and in the mall or whatever it happens to be. So that happens. There's lease in the land. Actually, where I live in a community, because I don't live in my own community, I live in southern Alberta. One of Tom's neighboring nations, they're Dene, the Tsutana Nation on the edge of Calgary. A huge city is actually growing around it. I live on one end of that reserve on leased land. We have 75-year lease in the land. For a while, banks were a bit hesitant about mortgaging, just a lease in the land rather than full ownership. But banks have come around and done that. So that's one area that a lot of that is happening. development is it's a leasing system. There is a bit of there's a new initiative pushed by Manny Jules, and it's being debated pretty heavily to have almost like a fee simple ownership on reserve. It's not being imposed. It would be an enabling legislation if it ever went ahead, and a community could have they would actually buy and sell the land, but it would be much like a state. So if I'm in the state of Victoria and I buy a piece of land, I own it, but the jurisdiction and regulation over it is by the Victoria state. The First Nation would have that same control, regulation, and so on, and have the ultimate underlying title. The fear of that by our community people in Canada is they're afraid of what happened in the United States, where reserve lands, there was this allotment system that was imposed that was individual land ownership, and a lot of that was lost through debt ownership or tax ownership. And now a lot of these reserves are huge in the United States, but they're checkerboards, they're referred to. A whole lot of non-Aboriginals living there. Under the civil law, they are under the nation's civil law, but under any criminal law in other areas, the tribal law doesn't apply to them. It really created quite a mess in the U.S., and Canadian First Nations are very afraid of that model. So, and I think Manny says, no, that wouldn't happen here, but I don't know. I haven't studied that real well yet, but I know there's a couple of models there in how to deal or develop those areas.
And if I may, I think what happens is what wise practices is about finding together, finding creative solutions, so that when you come to talk and you say, well, and it's a Western idea that really what you want is the bricks and the mortar, right? You want the physical, you want the property, because you can do whatever objective you want. So if it was about timber, you can take the trees off, and then at the end of it, you sell off the land a second time, right? So there's this double cost recovery thing that happens. Wise practices is to say, well, if when we're talking, we actually want what you as a partner coming to me want is the trees, or the minerals, or the ecotourism dollars. If that's what you're looking for, then it's to just say to you, okay, let's talk about that. Let's negotiate that. And when I said, I talk about praying and doing the smudge, saying I'm walking in this honestly, well, if we're honest and you say, oh, well, actually what I want is the trees, then what we start to negotiate about is the trees. And we recognize that the land is off the table. So the fee simple becomes completely superfluous, like it's a non-starter, because the land isn't there. But there are other benefits. In Canada, I don't know here, but in Canada, there are tax benefits to partnering with First Nations. So it becomes beneficial. All you have to do is figure out the equation, right? Figure out how to make it work. And that's what the wise practice is. It's a business mind who has business seeds, and an indigenous mind that has indigenous seeds, saying, now let's find the hybrid. Let's find because in the West we don't have the term hybrid in the same context. So I didn't mean to. I meant it in the scientific, not in the. I know that in Australia there was a designation of indigenous peoples that was hybrid, and I apologize. I meant no offense to anyone in the room. But it's creating a construction of the two. It's a merging together of the two to create something that is has the best of both worlds put into it.
May I ask you, Elder Tom, is there a word in your language, Blackfoot language, for leadership? And does it talk about other things other than a Western idea of what leadership is, about being of influence or being the boss?
Well, first of all, my name is Makuichiki, and I'm from Siksika. Now, that's in the translation of that word is, my name is Wu Shu, and I'm from the Blackfoot Reserve in Canada. Well, you question leadership. We have recognized leadership as long as I can remember. And leadership is taught in the Blackfoot version, you know. To be a leader, you've got to be an honest man or an honest woman. To be a leader, you have to be trusted, and you have to be helpful towards people. You got to have understanding. You weigh the wrong and the right. So to me, that was taught to me as a leadership. There are many ways to be a leadership, but you have to watch leadership. Some of these people that are in leadership are crooks. Yes, you know. And they use a front so good that you can't tell it. But at the end, it exposes itself. Because truth is honesty. And there are a few. We have leaders right now that our reserve is, I come from 7,000 people living on a reserve, and 3,000, the other 3,000 lives in the urban area. It's these urban areas that have lost their ways as a native, as a First Nation. They can only speak one language, English. And we're having a lot of problems with that. The other 7,000, I would say half and half. Well, let's say, 7,000, let's say 4,000, half and half. 3,000 can speak fluently, and I'm one of them. It's language is an issue with our people. And today we have Blackfoot classes in the schools because the elder, most of them are under 70 years old. There's a few that gone over 70, but the rest are beginners. We call them beginners. Because you can't be an elder overnight. You got to go through life to be an elder, to weigh the issues. It's these below 65 that become instant elders. And that hurts the tribe. They don't know enough about life yet. Life is, it's something. You can't just become a lawyer. These boys have to go through school. And same thing with our people. They have to learn from the elders. And especially the family. If your grandmother is living, you're about 4 years old. They take you away from your parents. That's the grandparents. While your parents are working, raising families, and you're being taught by your elders. There's in our reserve, it's a big issue today. Young people just talk English. They don't know anything about the past, who they are. You know. So, and they won't listen to the elders. And what they do is they join gangs. We got gangs on there. And it's a turmoil. Really is. It's hard work. I'm an elder. And my job, not only on the reserve, off the reserve. First, I worked for the Canada Corrections, and I worked at the prisons, trying to help people with their problems. Then I learned I'm helping others with their problems. What about mine? I got to look after this guy first. And so I even worked in Ottawa with what we call the alternative justice. And I worked over there for about 3 years. Because what we saw was too many natives in the correctional centers, in the penitentiaries. There's one correctional center in Alberta was 95% native. Yeah. They invited us to go in, and it's just few white people in there. The rest are natives. And they are young people that they have a chance. So we talk to them. But you know, it's not easy to change one person. But if you can change that one person, that's a success. Yeah. Because I know I've been a client of the justice system. Yes. And one day I made up my mind, no, this isn't the life for me. Everybody is never a loser in there. Yeah. So when I left, I decided that's it. And I asked someone greater than me, one morning I had a hangover. I asked this Creator of mine for an answer to my problem. I had to be honest when I'm asking. And it took time. Finally, I got back on my feet. And that's 44 years ago. I never went back to drugs or alcohol because one elder out of the thousands of elders, only one got through to me. And he told me, this body of yours, and same with you guys right now, your body is the house of the Creator. That's His house. You clean it good, always keep it clean, you go places. You don't have to open the doors, they open as you approach them. This wise old man told me that. Then he told me, you're going to be leader of man. I didn't believe him. I was in doubt all the time because I wasn't honest. I was filthy inside. And when I start cleaning the house, I start feeling good. I got rid of my drugs, my alcohol. Took some time. Then love came into my life. Trust, honesty. And I was able to walk. First time I ever say, I love you to my children. Yeah, because when I was drinking, I pushed them away. You know, it's a sad thing to be in. And when my wife died, I changed my mind. And today, I love working with these people. That's where my heart is. Yeah. That's where my mind is. To anybody. I don't look at you, oh, he's this, he's that. No. You're humans to me. And you're brothers to me. You're sisters to me. That's the way I think today. The old man told me, this great phenomenon spirit has put us on earth. We didn't come in by our own choosing. It was Him. Selected a few good people. They're going to be good people. And a few bad ones. The bad ones can correct you by their actions. You look at them, oh, I don't want to be there. And today I'm happy. I look after the clients that come to Banff Center. All different nations, Canada, natives. There's Crees, there's Sarsis, there's Blackfoots, Tanaha people, there's all kinds. About over 600 tribes. Sometimes These people come in, they never smutzed before. And I'm going to ask you this. Anybody in this room, never mind these two, they know. Have you ever smutzed?
Yep.
Good, this, good. You smutzed?
Smoke.
At base?
Oh, yes.
At
You
that?
know, to smudge is for purification of the mind, the body, and the spirit. When you go into a meeting, I never see anybody smudge. Smudge at home, go to a meeting. And that is that your spirit will be with you. Honesty, listening, getting messages. But when you don't smudge, your mind is out playing outside, but you're sitting there. It's true. And my job over in Banff, I enjoy the people, young people, and I ask them questions. Some of them don't know who the Spirit is. That's why throughout the years gone by, since before treaty up to now, we have survived because of our belief in all creation is holy. Even a creature, small one, has a life, can see, can feel maybe. Hungry, just like us. So you let them go, don't kill them. But for me, I used to kill them.
I just saw you attack a mosquito before.
I know.
Yeah.
And I was with you. I was made sure that it was dead. Do you have a word for leadership? We don't.
Well, leadership.
Or leader.
A leader?
A leader, yeah.
A leader.
Because the
Oh,
ship is the
we're
kind
all
of
leaders.
building of the boat, isn't it?
We are all leaders.
Yeah.
Only we don't practice.
I think it's really
Yes.
interesting it comes back to this idea of practice. It's all about the way in which we work in the world, how we are with each other. It's the practice every day of who we are. I mean, that elder that you talked about who saw you, saw that spark of leadership in you, that you would be in 40 years an elder. So the thing that I always get from your teachings, Elder Tom, is this idea that leadership from an indigenous perspective is what we see in each other more than a positional thing, more than a thing that we might even see in ourselves. Perhaps we're too blind to see in ourselves, but we can see it in other people or in their practice of what they do. You know, I love it when Adrian just wants to come in and have a chat and to kind of talk about his ideas and where he's at, and it shows a deep thinking, and I think that's a part of leadership. Or, you know, those sort of practices, I can see that in your work, that there is something there. I love those ideas of leadership is about being honest and being loyal and being truthful. I mean, these aren't the attributes that you would see on a business ledger for leadership attributes, perhaps.
Can I just say,
Please.
if I may, culturally, we don't have a word either for a leader. For my position, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am either, by the way.
Please tell.
No. That's a woman's secret. However, well, maybe I that much from the gap of 70. Very little from, so you can guess. But I think what it is for us is we do have a word, nangnak, for to teach, to learn. And I think that's the word that qualifies the leader. My learning and my teaching at the moment, and I'm very happy to say that I'm teaching Woiwurrung as we speak, although my language, I'm not fluent, but I've been very fortunate over the years to learn my language from my aunts, my uncles, not so much my father. But it was always a practice of mine to maintain my language, and I'm now teaching that. And I should be speaking it every day, but it's very hard when I've been brought up speaking English, but that language has been taught to me. But I guess, it's that time in my life when it's my role to do so. However, my learning is that in my time, in my place now as the senior elder, is that I cannot be the head person of our community. It is a male role. And that role, very sadly for me, was vacated by my brother and indeed my next brother in very recent times. I am where am I going with this with age, is that, I'm sorry for being emotional, but I accept this responsibility, but I know my place. I can not be that head person, although I accept the title of the senior elder. I'm the oldest of the generation of our community, and I would like to think that my business world has been the value of that learning, and it's now my turn, although I've been doing that along my journey, is that I can practice teaching as an elder. And I think all of the things that you said are very true. It's a place in life, and certainly we're each given that opportunity, aren't we, to be here. And it's not our saying, it's not our doing. But I also believe that no matter how much we plan, and we should plan for a better life, is it's not in our hands, but we can only do what we can do while we're here. I just wanted to thank you too for your honesty. None of us, I don't believe, live a life that doesn't have a background. And the things that I've done in my life, although I may not have been incarcerated, they're things that I can't get back. I've lost them. And I think the learning of that is that we never sidestep, for want of a better word, an opportunity that comes our way. And you took that opportunity. And indeed, you are a very wise leader now.
In our culture, at an early age, our grandmothers, our grandfathers, our uncles, they take over, teaching you respect, teaching you the four gifts of life, to be kind, to be honest, to be trustworthy, and to love. Okay. They teach you to listen. Don't interfere. Listen. And be patient. Because someday you're going to be a leader when you do these. And they're hard to do it. Very hard. Yeah. So.
Oh, go ahead.
I kind of feel a little bit out of place here because I'm the only one who's really not an academic. But I'm very much a practitioner, and so I pick up, I suppose, my learning and skills, pretty much as along the road as I'm going. So it's very interesting to hear the insights, coming from both sides. And what I'd like to do is, if I can, is try and tie a couple of conversation threads that were both from our sides, with only joy introducing the comment of Aboriginal people struggling to get recognition, in terms of being recognised as people, actually recognising our ties to land, country, and to the waterways, and that really only came through with Eddie Mabo, and that's not that long ago. That's in our lifetime. 4 years ago, we actually had Kevin Rudd as the then Prime Minister actually acknowledging Aboriginal people once again in terms of a sorry statement. We look at 4 years down the track and we still haven't moved, that far. And I suppose from my experience and my insights is I would actually look at Aboriginal leadership is not so as much as leadership as that we've become very good managers of government processes that have been imposed upon us. I actually see some little smiles there too from Don. And so rather than Aboriginal leadership, we've actually become very good government service delivery, and we've become very good government managers of a process. And especially, one of my passions is economic participation, which includes employment and economic development and business development. Is we see the landscape of Aboriginal Australia scattered with failed economic projects, based mainly upon what government has determined Aboriginal people can do. So I'm very much aware of that and totally in agreement of that. And we've got a constitution that still fails to recognise Aboriginal people properly. I want to pick up on your side though, Brian, is where you mentioned treaty. There was that mention of treaty. What is the role in the treaty? How has that actually played or not played a role in terms of the economic development for First Nations people in Canada? And especially when I look at the experiences of the Maori people in New Zealand, where they actually have the Waitangi Treaty and are now through that actually gaining access in terms of rights to water, land, and even asset return and that sort of thing. And then Don, from the legal side, I'm actually interested in exploring this thing of what is the equality that you need to be sitting at the table to be a part of that real conversation around economic development. So one question for...
Well, with the treaties, until 1982, when Canada repatriated our Constitution, which means we brought our Constitution home and we don't have to go to the Queen of England anymore to get an amendment signed off. At that same time, we also had a Bill of Rights, which is called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and Aboriginal and treaty rights were also entrenched. So pre-1982, the only real rights that were recognized by the government were if there were treaties. And of course, the treaty document was very, very brief. It was like 2, 3 pages, 4 pages, and it had a list of a number of rights. You get twine and ammunition, you get a cow and a plow and so on, because they wanted you to adapt to an agriculture, the new economy. And the twine and shells and that were so you could still practice your traditional livelihood. And there was generally a clause in there that you could still continue to hunt and fish on unoccupied Crown lands, so whatever wasn't taken up. So that was somewhat respected, but after 1982, now Aboriginal rights are respected. That is, if you can say our people have some connection to this territory and prove that, the government has to respect that. It's very, very expensive litigation to ever do that, so not a whole lot of nations have actually proven their Aboriginal right. But in the end, all that happens with winning an Aboriginal rights case, of course that gives you a ton of leverage, is a declaration of the court that you have such a right. In practicality, how that gets implemented and respected is a whole other ballgame. Governments can still more or less, okay, so they have a right. Governments are still going to develop their lands and the lands and resources on the Crown land. So it's more like in theory, it's there, but in practice, less so. So for example, where I'm from in Alberta, we have a numbered treaty. The ability to hunt, it was still there and still is there. That was respected to the extent that if you were charged under a game law and you appeared in court, you proved you were a member of Treaty 8, like where I'm from, I'm a member of Treaty 8, therefore I'm exempted from this law. That's usually how it happened. So the charge is dropped and you're okay. As far as the government goes, and this has been litigated and the court has actually sided to some extent to the Indigenous view of this, but the government view was, okay, you signed your X on the treaty, because we couldn't even read or write or understand what that was, even with interpreters. The real estate deal is done, right? Now get out of our way, we're going to exploit and settle the resources and land. First Nations have always viewed the relationship as nation to nation, a bit of where RCAP has gone, this Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, and the Supreme Court language about two sovereignties reconciling and living side by side and living together in a partnership relationship. First Nations have always argued that in the treaty relationship. They often use the phrase spirit and intent of treaties. So all of that to say that it's been since 1982 with the entrenchments of the rights in a constitutional document. So all state action and laws have to respect that higher law of the land. It's only since then, and especially a lot of cases that have happened since then, this Sparrow case having this duty to consult as part of this duty, the honor of the Crown to respect this relationship. There's a fiduciary duty there because Indigenous people are at a very disadvantaged power relationship vis-a-vis the state. So the courts have looked at that and said, if you said Aboriginal treaty rights are recognized and protected in the Constitution, it has to mean something. This is what it means. If you're going to have any power over the First Nations, you got to look out for their interests as well. This honor of the Crown concept has come out of that. And this duty to consult now happens. And Don's right. It's on the Crown, that is the governments, both levels of government too. And they do a bit, but they never put much resources behind it. It's really the business, the corporations, out of good business sense and knowing that there's a bit of certainty there if we build a relationship with this community. And corporations are miles and miles ahead of government in duty to consult, which leads to economic benefits, jobs, businesses that spur off. There's even equity ownership in some of these initiatives now. In British Columbia, any new mines, and this still has to be negotiated, any new mines that happen that's affecting this region, and there might be 3 or 4 or 5 First Nations there, they could negotiate a part of the royalty that goes to the provincial government now. So there's all kinds of new versions of economic benefits coming out of that duty to consult, and before development can happen, the traditional owners have to have some benefit of that exploitation. lots of good things, but still a struggle. Takes a lot of negotiating. You've got to hire our lawyers, and I should practice that again. Anyway, that's part of the answer. It might have been long-winded, but that's about the first things that popped to my mind.
And sorry, can you repeat? I got lost in Brian's.
And so, Don, in terms of that being equals at the table, especially in terms of economic development and negotiations, in actually, I suppose the divisions or the lack of recognition of westernised law against native law and law as in LORE and LAW. So how do we actually come to the table as equals and being recognised as such in terms of that negotiating process?
I think it primarily comes down, again, it comes back to these wise practices. And one of the things that we've been taught through hard-earned experience of our ancestors is that agency, people are willing to take away another person's agency. They will also are very unwilling to just give it back. So it's not a matter of saying, when you're ready to let me sit at the table as an equal, I will sit at the table as an equal. Andrea Lord says, and I know it's overly quoted, and that the master's tools will never help to dismantle the master's house. And I apologize for the misquote. But at some point, and when I read the essay, what I think she's saying is that, the misunderstanding about the quote, and I may be absolutely wrong, but is that what happens is when let me stop for a second. What needs to happen is that the recognition that these aren't necessarily the master's tools. We fall into the way the quote is misquoted all the time seems to assume that all of these tools, like the connection to the land, like the connection to place, like our understanding, like our good business sense and our 10,000 years of experience, that those are somehow tools that belong to the Western construction or the Western world. And that's just not true. We come with equal tools and part of it is through education and through recognition and through teaching our children and raising up our children to say, this is the vision that I came with, and it's up to you to move forward. What happens is that instills a sense of pride and a sense of agency, so that it's not a question of how do we go to it, but why aren't we at the table as equals? It only makes sense that we would be.
I'm aware that we're just getting close to 4 o'clock and the cameras will need to have a rest soon. Would you like to sum up?
I just wanted to pick up a little bit on when you asked the question to Elder Tom about is there a word for leadership, and just a few thoughts of my own. In a way, there's that debate, can leadership be taught? Because certainly we all agree that management can be taught. Management is a science, leadership is an art, that kind of debate. I think a lot of what Elder Tom was sharing is what Indigenous leadership is about. It's, we do need the science, we do need to do these technical things to make things happen, but it's grounded in a strong ethic. We go to business school, we have to actually teach ethics, same as us lawyers. You teach them all these technical tools, they can be pretty dirty people, or the possibility, right? That's why you have to teach ethics. It's like it's taught here and here. In Indigenous leadership, and Jackie Ottman from the University of Calgary, as in a study she did with Saskatchewan First Nations leaders, heard from them, it was the same thing, that ever since they're a kid and they're learning leadership, being taught by elders and older, wiser people, is the values, the meaning right? Being leaders, part of what leadership is creating meaning and vision in the community, so they're inspired to something, right? If our communities are dysfunctional and in a mess, and there's gangs and all the social problems, it's hard to get out of that unless a leader can make meaning for that community again. So youth have dreams again, and so on. Anyway, so I wanted to make that point about leaders make meaning. They bring in the values and the culture and the introduction of traditional institutions and ways of doing and being. But not to say that I need to go back 500 years to the Cree, what the Cree did, and implement it here. It could be some of that. It could be sometimes process and models and so on, but maybe it's principles and ideas and concepts rather than a particular way of doing things. And in Canada, there's a huge change, and there still is some of that, what Auntie Joy was saying, that some community women from way, way up north say, you know, in our community, a woman as chief is not going to happen in the near future, but I would argue it will. That's not where we try to explore, because I think times have changed and people have understood that women, as a matter of fact, it's amazing in post-secondary education in Canada for Indigenous people, this isn't the absolute empirical fact, but it's pretty darn close. It's about 3 to 1 women, Indigenous women in school than men. And in Canada, we have 660, I can't remember the exact number, First Nations across Canada, and we are now up to approximately 150 women. There are some chief and councils that are entirely women. Anyway, so that's not where I was headed, but I wanted to make that point as well. But just this idea and introduction of value, traditional institutions, and so on in our communities. And that's what our communities, our programs try to explore is, sure, we need to learn to manage, to plan, to implement, to measure for results, and we will do that because it's important in today's complex, interconnected global world. But we also need to ground it in our culture, our values, and make meaning. So identity and culture is still strong in our communities. And I didn't have a chance to do this because we were so busy in the previous thing. I was going to give you a little PowerPoint thing, but I will just say that we've come up with our own 7-element model this is online, best practices in Aboriginal community development, a literature review and wise practices approach, and identity and culture is the first element. Leadership is huge, planning, measuring for results, collaborations and partnerships. These are all elements we found by looking at other best practices research around North America, but we also cite an Australian study there. So that's online. That's a little on the technical side, but we really found when we were doing competency map research with Indigenous leaders in Canada and the United States, because we held some focus groups down there, the primary thing that almost all of them said was language as well, but identity, culture being huge, because a lot of contemporary leaders have lost language, but it's great that so many are taking the initiative to reintroduce language, like to reintroducing traditional protocols, institutions, ways of doing, being, and knowing. Anyway, I could go on forever, so I'm just going to stop there.
And I'm kind of not sure how to wrap this up because it's been such a rich conversation, but I wanted to thank everyone for being here, and especially to thank our wonderful Canadian visitors, brothers, Elder Tom, Brian Calliope and Dom McIntyre, and to also thank Auntie Joy Wanda-Murphy for being here today. It's really been fantastic. And put your hands together.